I read an interesting article this week. This past February, there was an article published highlighting several recent studies on swearing. Yeah, because this is what you hear in church all the time. We're going to talk about swearing. Studies have shown that there are actually some physical and emotional benefits to the, and I stress, occasional use of some of the more colorful words in the English language. And I want to clarify something as we go, but before we go too far on this, I saw every one of the board members straighten up as soon as I started. No. Two things I want to. We're really talking about the occasional use, and I'll talk about that more in just a minute. We're talking about the occasional use, and we're talking about the socially unacceptable words that we consider profanity that I'm not going to give any examples. Okay, but the socially unacceptable words. We are not talking about taking the Lord's name in vain. Okay, I'll say it. I've said it so many times to so many kids. God's last name is not damn it. Okay, don't ever think it is. You use to take the name of God, our Father in heaven, in vain, and subject it down to the insult of using it in an exclamatory statement, and doing the same with the Lord Jesus Christ after all they have done for us. Yeah, that's a sin. It's one of the original commandments. God put it there for a reason, and somebody who uses it as that such, yeah, they should be in danger of hellfire as far as I'm concerned. You don't use the Lord's name in vain. It is too precious. He is too precious. He is too wonderful and powerful. I'm not talking about it ever being okay to use that. I'm talking about the socially unacceptable words. The words that actually a couple of times Paul used in the Greek. So several studies have shown the possible benefits of the occasional swear word. And teens, understand what I'm saying. The possible benefits of the occasional. Okay? First of all, it can increase the effectiveness of communication. Because it conveys the meaning of a sentence, it also conveys the emotion behind it. And I have shared before how, now, you gotta remember, I was 6 years in the military, and I was 12 years working in the automotive business. Okay, there's no swear word that anybody can say that I haven't heard 100 times before. And especially when we were in Arkansas, I had people come to me that were going through horrible things in their lives. And they wanted to talk to me because they knew that the only way they could aptly convey the pain and the anger and the frustration that they were going through was through swear words. And they knew it didn't bother me at all. Just go for it, have a ball, just get it out. So yeah, I can see that. The possible, it does. It conveys the meaning of a sentence, and it also it conveys the emotion behind it. Also, it can increase pain tolerance. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to read a lot of this. They did an experiment where the subjects were asked to come up with a list of words, including swear words, that they might use if they hit their thumb with a hammer. Okay? They were also asked to come up with a list of neutral words to describe a chair, like wooden or green or something like that. And then they were asked to submerge their hand in ice water for as long as they could, while repeating a word from either list, a swear word or a neutral word. The participants who repeated a swear word were able to keep their hands submerged in the ice water for almost 50% longer than those who repeated a neutral word. Okay? And not only that, the swearing also made the participants feel like the pain was not as intense. It was almost as if it raised their pain threshold as they were doing it. I just thought that was interesting. Now, other potential health benefits include increased circulation, elevated endorphins, an overall sense of calm, control, and well-being. Now, I will also point out that praying and worshiping in the Spirit causes all those things too. So, I'm just saying, But the interesting thing that they wanted to note was that though there are some apparent advantages to the occasional swear word, researchers caution that those who use profanity regularly have decreased benefits. Okay, so if you don't use profanity every day, but you're in a stressful situation, you hit your thumb with a hammer, your hands are cold, you're furious at some point, and you accidentally let loose a couple of colorful words, the idea is that the being bad, the feeling of being bad, increases your heart rate, it increases the endorphin levels, and it can lower your stress. But if you're foul-mouthed every day, and cussing is simply just a part of your vocabulary, you walk around cussing like the proverbial sailor, there's no benefits to it. Okay? This study, what's really interesting, this study and discussion is not justification for swearing on a regular basis. Okay? Please, find another way to show your ignorance. There's plenty, with technology the way there is, there's plenty of ways to show how silly you are. Okay? You don't need to swear. But it's a cautionary study that there can be some benefits to the occasional swear word released in a stressful situation. But if you're foul-mouthed already, don't even think about it. There's no justification for being foul-mouthed. Now, what's interesting, I was recently having a discussion with other pastors about this about this very subject, because I and one other pastor that was in the discussion, we came from the secular workforce into the ministry. And when it comes to language and acceptable subjects of discussion, the learning curve is very sharp. When you come out of the automotive industry, and he was a bouncer, actually. And he came out of that and went into the ministry. And Brenda shared this figure too, and he said his wife was always worried that he was going to get ticked off at a board member or something like that and just rip him and cuss him up one side down the other. And we were laughing, and one of the other pastors said, "Yeah, I've been a pastor for 30 years, and my wife still worries about that." But one lady, the leader of the group, was a very, very wise and godly woman. And she put it this way: one's holiness is not measured by the number of swear words that come out of the mouth. One's holiness is not measured by the number of swear words that come out of the mouth. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying it's not a measure of holiness. Throughout my life, I've known people, Christian cops, Christian firemen, and many other professions, where the profanity was so prevalent, and it was such a standard part of the work environment, that they actually had a hard time being taken seriously in their profession because they didn't partake in profanity because of their religion. It was really a tough spot. They found themselves in a really tough position that they know God wants them to be in that job. But how do they relate effectively without profanity? It's what could be termed a morally ambiguous situation. A morally ambiguous situation, because they had two choices. Either they hold fast to the Christian tradition of not swearing, or they not be taken seriously and advance their career by communicating in what in the career is the accepted language, the accepted form of communication. So now we're not talking about situational ethics here. We're not talking about that something is bad, but it's only bad in this situation and not in this situation. Okay? I'm talking about moral ambiguity, a lack of clarity in ethical decision making. In other words, moral ambiguity is when you have an issue or a situation in question that has moral or ethical elements, but the morally correct action to take is unclear. Swearing or not swearing. A young mother who seems in her position, she has two choices. Either become a stripper or let her kids starve. Or a Christian committing an act of violence in order to protect their family or innocent people. Situations where the morally correct action is unclear. Now I want to take a minute and caution, especially those of us who have been Christians for a long time. Okay? Stop right now as we're talking about this. Take a deep breath and come down from your moral high horse. Okay? Because this is something that can be, we don't know how everybody thinks and how the situation that everyone is in. And we forget. My daughters have asked me, and I probably shared this before, my daughters have asked me, Dad, what if I came home one day and my boyfriend had beaten me up? And I told them this, I would like to think that the Holy Spirit would get a hold of me. And I would be more focused on you and your injuries and your heartbreak than I would about going out and getting revenge. I'd like to think that. And in my heart, there's a 50-50 chance. Okay, guys, trust me. Fathers know. Your kids are parents know. But with dads, it's a different thing. We're supposed to be the protectors. And yeah, what I want to do is get the biggest baseball bat that I could and go to the fire department and go to his house in the ambulance that's going to take that piece of dog meat home or to the hospital when I'm done with it. That's what I want to do. But I would hope that I wouldn't do that. I would hope that I would focus on my sweet daughter and take care of her and let the police handle the rest of it. But I can't guarantee that because I've never been in that situation. We have never been in so many situations that we stand in judgment on. So I myself included, as we get into the book of Esther, we kind of have to take a breath, come down off our moral high horse, and realize that we don't know exactly what that situation is. There's one picture that I've had for a long time that I love. Do not judge. You don't know what storm I've asked her to walk through. We don't know the storm that God has asked these people to walk through. So let's look at it through the eyes of God, with grace and with love, not with the degree of moral rightness. Because it is in this very place of moral ambiguity that we find the people of God as we begin to study the book of Esther. Okay? The people found themselves in these morally ambiguous situations where the right and godly course of action was simply not clear. Now, in the book of Esther, we have two main people. You can call them characters if you want to. They're characters in the story. But we got to remember, these are real people. These were real historical people. We have Esther. I hope she's in the book. Her name, it's titled after her. And she's a beautiful young Jewish woman whose parents have died when she was very young. She grew up in Persia after the Babylonian exile. So she did not grow up in Jerusalem. And she's a beautiful young woman. And then we have Mordecai. Mordecai is her cousin who took her in and raised her with his family as his own. And we're going to get to more of that. We're going to read that passage in just a minute. But these are the story's main characters, Esther and Mordecai. And then we have King Xerxes. Now, he's a Persian king, and he's kind of like the Persian Nebuchadnezzar. I kept thinking, no, I'm not going to say Persian version, because it just sounds silly. But he's the Persian Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? He's a brilliant military strategist. He's a good leader. He's a good king. But his weakness is he is prone to drunken outbursts. He likes to get drunk, and he does stupid things when he gets drunk. So that's just the reality of it. So that's in this story, that's pretty much who he is. Then we have Haman. We won't meet him today. We're going to look at chapters 1 and 2. He comes in chapter 3. But remember about him is that he's an Agagite. Yeah, it's a real word. He's an Agagite, which was an original tribe in Canaan. He's a member of one of the original tribes that Israel conquered when they took over the Holy Land. Now that's important to the story, so try to remember that. I'll remind you, but try to remember that anyway. And Haman was just an overall evil, arrogant, amoral dirtbag. He was just a jerk from the word go, and that's all he does is be a jerk in this whole story. And then finally we have Queen Vashti. Now she has a very small but important role first chapter. She was Xerxes' first wife. So, now the story of the book of Esther really is a wonderful and exciting story. It's amazing. It's very R-rated. It has intrigue. It has ironic twists and heroes and villains. It's an awesome story. I really love it. Now, it's set in the Persian capital of Susa, about 140 years after the Babylonian captivity for the Israelites. Now, I tried to get this. Tried to put this. This is our timeline. We've used this before. And if you look up here, 536 is when the Medo-Persian Empire. It's when the Medo-Persians took over and conquered Babylon. And if you look right below it, about 2 years after that, the Israelites were allowed to return to Jerusalem, but only a very few of them actually did. And then about 140 years later, there's Queen Esther. 479 BC is when Queen Esther came along. So it's about that timeline. And there's two very curious facts that we want to remember as we're going through the book of Esther. First of all, God's name is never mentioned in the story. It's the only book of the Bible that God's name is not mentioned in this story at all. And what's really cool about it is it gives us an opportunity to look for God's activity. There's coincidences in it, and there's ironic reversals. It's really a cool story. But it gives us an opportunity. It challenges us to see God's work in His people's lives, even when it's not spelled out for us. That we can see how God is working. We're just not told that's God. So that's the first thing. The second interesting fact is no motives are assigned to the actions of the people in this story. Okay? When we were doing the book of Daniel wrote that book. So he put in why he was doing this thing. Esther didn't write this book. So the author doesn't give motives. So it leaves the interpretation up to the reader as why they are doing what they're doing. That can be a slippery slope, but at the same time, that's what we got. So we will assign assume some motives to the actions of the people. So that's how we're setting this up. That's how that's where we're starting at when we read the first two chapters. We're not going to read the whole thing. I was really tempted to kind of look over and find one of the teens and say, okay, read the first chapter out loud and hand them a microphone just to see them sweat. But I wasn't going to do that. So we're getting into chapter 1, and King Xerxes is there, and things have been good. He's done lots of conquering, the money is flowing in, so he has a huge party for all the rulers of his 127 provinces. Okay? The military leaders, the princes, the nobles, everybody who is anybody was invited to Susa, which is the capital, for a 6-month-long party. 6 months of hanging around the palace, eating and drinking and doing. I'm sure they had, tours to go around and everything, and just 6 months of being taken care of in the lap of luxury. So when that party was over, after 6 months, Xerxes was a good king because he threw a 7-day party for his palace staff. Okay? They've been catering to these guys for 6 months, so he says, okay, now it's your time to party. Now it's your turn to party. And he gives them a party for 7 days for thanking them for a job well done. And in verse 8, it says, by the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions. For the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Wow. 7 days of debauchery. Now, while that party was going on, Queen Vashti was giving a banquet for all the women in the royal palace. So the ladies who were over here probably being nice and polite and proper, and the men were over here being animals. That's never happened before. But so she's having her banquet, and on the last day of the party, Xerxes is drunk, and he commands that Queen Vashti come in And so he could show off her beauty. She was a wonderfully beautiful woman. So he says, he commands her to come in just so he can show her off. And Queen Vashti refused to come. Now, this is the first place that we can actually try to assign the reasons for her actions. Assign a motive. The two most popular are A, she's throwing a banquet of her own. She doesn't need to be dealing with her drunk husband. And that's her attitude. What is more likely, there is some indication in some historical records that at this time, Queen Vashti was pregnant. And pregnant women didn't necessarily show their faces in public, especially in such a raucous environment as that, when they're pregnant. The thing, I lend myself to the pregnancy theory because that's probably what saved her life. Because King Xerxes is furious that she will not come. So he consults his experts. We're going to read chapter 1, verses 16 to 22. We're going to read those out loud. Okay. Verse 16. Memucan, the Persian name, he's the head advisor for Xerxes. He answered the king and his nobles, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. So if it please the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medes that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. The king and his nobles thought this made good sense, so he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. And I put that last part all in yellow just to stress it's stupid. Okay? Because every man should be. I know it's looking at an ancient time through 20th century no logic, but come on. Somebody had to think that was a bad idea at some point. So he banishes Queen Vashti, and he proclaims that all wives have to respect their husbands. Like I said, in most instances, if she had defied him like that, he would have had her killed. So my bet is that she was pregnant, and he didn't want to kill the baby along with her. So that's my theory. So that's chapter 1. That all happened in chapter 1. So we get to chapter 2, and it's the next morning. Xerxes wakes up, and he's probably hungover, and he thinks, great, now I need a new queen. So no doubt his attendants have been thinking about this before. So they suggest to him to bring all the most beautiful virgins from all over the kingdom to Susa, and to give them beauty treatments and get them all spruced up, and whichever one pleases the king the most will become the new queen. And he's still hungover, so he thinks that sounds like a good idea. This is where we meet Mordecai and Esther. Okay? Chapter 2, verses 5 through 7. At that time there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family had been among those who, with the king Jehoiakim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah. That was her Hebrew name, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. So we meet our two heroes in this part. Esther was a young and beautiful virgin, and so per the king's order, she was taken from her home to the palace to be a contestant to become queen. Okay? And Mordecai told her, this is interesting to know and remember this, Mordecai told Esther not to reveal her nationality or her family background to anyone. As far as anybody in the palace was concerned, she was Persian. She was not a Hebrew. So, each of the contestants were given a full 12 months of beauty treatments. And then after each one had this one whole year of beauty treatments, each young woman, one at a time, would be called to the king's bedroom in the evening. And he would audition them. And then they would go back to the harem in the morning. But Esther had gained the favor of a guy named Haggai. And he was the guy in charge of the whole harem. She was beautiful. She was most likely very kind and very dignified. Everybody in her circle admired her and thought a great deal of her. So here is the first, what we would call, morally ambiguous situation that Esther is finding herself in. Because when it's her turn to go to the king's bedroom, Haggai gives her some advice. Each woman was allowed to take whatever she wanted. That's how it's phrased. They can take whatever they want to the king, with them when they go to the king. And Haggai told her the best things to take, and she took only what he told her to. And she goes and she spends the night with the king. After that, Xerxes immediately falls for Esther, and he wants her to be his queen. And he makes her queen, and he throws a big banquet to introduce her to everybody. Now, I'll get back to that after we finish the chapter, because there's one more section of the chapter we've got to go over. And that was, the last part talks about how Mordecai, his habit was to hang around the king's gate. Most likely that's where a lot of business was done, and Mordecai was most likely a businessman. So one day, two of the king's guards became very angry with King Xerxes and plotted to assassinate him. Mordecai found out about that plot, and he went and told Esther. Esther told King Xerxes about the plot and gave Mordecai credit for it. And then they did the investigation, found out it was true, and they executed both of them. Verse 23 says, "This was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign." That's another little thing to remember. Mordecai's feat and his favor was recorded in the book of the history book that they kept of everything that goes on in Xerxes' reign. So that sets the stage, and almost all of the characters are in place. So we're only looking at this. This is as far as we're going today with this. Next week we'll meet Haman, and we'll keep going. But many people, Christians and Jews alike, have a really hard time with Esther's decision to have sex with the king. Okay? Many Bible scholars consider her a morally ambiguous person because of her decision. It doesn't help that in verse 15, it says that she took only what Haggai told her to. Basically, what they're inferring from that is she took advice from Haggai about how to please the king sexually. So she was not only a willing participant in it, she was an enthusiastic participant. And as a Hebrew, Esther went against several of the Torah laws. She went against the Torah to have sex before marriage. She went against the Torah to have sex with a non-Hebrew at all. And then she married a non-Hebrew, which is a big no-no in the Torah. So scholars consider her to be a morally ambiguous person. Two things about that. First, I don't agree with that at all. I have a problem with the idea that she chose to spend the night with the king. Okay? She was taken from her home. She was put into a harem. She was held there. She could not leave. So you could call her either a prisoner or a slave, whichever one. She could not leave. And she was ordered to go to the king's bedroom and have sex with him. So she had a choice. Either do it. Vashti was the best example, the best outcome that she could hope by resisting, and be banished. Or, more likely, she would have been killed. Or worse. There's things worse than death. So I have a problem with the idea that she chose to do that. And secondly, I honestly say she was not a morally ambiguous person. She was put, through no fault of her own, into a morally ambiguous situation. She had two choices. Neither of them were actually desirable. The fact is, she took advice from a friend and willingly participated. The fact that she did that does not make her sinful or immoral. If anything, she was trying to survive. She was trying to make the best out of a horrible situation. I've been running this whole scenario. I know this is where God is leading me to preach today. And I know this is what he wants me to highlight. And I thought about this. I knew this back on Monday or Tuesday this week. And I was running this by Brenda and telling her about this and how I'm focusing and stuff. And she had one simple question. She said, what am I supposed to take away from all this? And I had to go to the Lord and say, what am I talking about here? Well, we're going to start with the truth of Scripture. Okay? We're going to start with 3 scriptures that are truthful. Daniel, in the words of Nebuchadnezzar, his rule, talking about God, his rule is everlasting and his kingdom is eternal. All the people of the earth are nothing compared to him. He does as he pleases among the angels of heaven and among the people of the earth. No one can stop him or say to him, what do you mean by doing these things? Isaiah said, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And finally, Paul told the Romans, oh, how great are the riches and wisdom and knowledge, or God's riches and wisdom and knowledge. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. For who can know the Lord's thoughts? Who knows enough to give him advice? And who has given him so much that he needs to pay it back? For everything comes from him and exists by his power, and it is intended for his glory. All glory to him forever. Amen. What we're seeing here in Scripture, honestly, is that throughout the story of Esther, in spite of Israel's exile, and in spite of God's apparent absence from the story, God is still in control of the history of his people, and he has not abandoned his promises. God does not abandon the promises of his people. For us, it's a message that I'm not sure I wanted to give, but it's something that we have to hear, that we have to remember as followers of Christ. We may never find ourselves in a morally ambiguous situation like Esther. Okay? We will probably never find ourselves in a position to have sex or die. Most people will never find themselves in a position where they either have to do something immoral like stripping or their children are going to starve. And I pray that nobody ever finds themselves in a situation where they potentially have to kill someone in order to protect innocent lives. Those are extreme situations. Extreme situations. We may never find ourselves in those spots. But I guarantee you, we will find ourselves in situations where you simply don't know what to do. You're standing in a crossroads, and through no fault of your own, you're in a situation where there simply is no good choice, where the options start at bad and go downhill from there, where no course of action genuinely seems like the smart one. You're going to find yourselves in those situations, and you're going to be getting conflicting advice from friends and family. And you're going to find yourself in a situation where you've prayed your guts out for months, and God doesn't seem like he's even around. And if he is, he's not talking. You're going to feel like those dry bones that Ezekiel talked about. I've known so many very godly people who found themselves simply thrown into a situation, an ugly situation, through no fault of theirs. It wasn't their fault that they're there. They just got stuck there. And they don't know what to do. And God isn't giving them any, it doesn't seem like he's giving them any leading at all. And peace is nowhere to be found. And unfortunately, when we get in those situations, some very well-meaning Christians may very well tell you, well, then you've got sin in your life, and you need to get to confess and repent of that sin, and then everything will be fine. That's a crock. Okay? If you're in a situation because of your own sin, by God, you'll know it. There's times in our lives that it's not our fault that we're there. We just are. The Apostle Paul had this happen to him. He had gone through shipwrecks, he had gone through arrests, he had gone through beatings, and he told the Christians, he told the Corinthians, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. And each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. What Paul is saying, honestly, is that sometimes circumstances in your life are going to suck. Period. You're going to go through life. And there's times when it's just going to be a raw deal. It's just reality. And you're going to have to gut it out. And I understand that. But this is the times when God feels the farthest away. Truly, I trust him when I tell you that is when he is the closest. He may not feel it. I understand that. But he would never leave you. We have to stay faithful. You have to continue in prayer. I know you've been praying your guts out for months. Keep it going. Don't give up. Continue in worship. Remember God's promises. He said in Hebrews, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. He's promised us that. He will not bail on us. He didn't bail on the Israelites. He's not going to bail on us. And we have to remember his promises. And the one that I cling to the most, Romans chapter 8. No, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loves us. Doesn't matter if it doesn't feel that way. We are still more than conquerors. And I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers. Now it goes out there. Neither height nor depth nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. If you don't remember anything else when you're going through a dry period like that, nothing can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. You can't always trust the way things seem to be. And you can't always trust how things feel. I know. Brenda and I have been through it. We've been through it as a couple. We've been through it as individuals. I know so many. I could point out 6 different people in this congregation right now that have been through it. That's the time when the rubber meets the road. That's when we have to be faithful. And we just have to keep plugging, understanding, knowing that God does not give up on us. He does not break his promises. It doesn't matter. You may be in a situation where you feel like you've got two roads to go, both of them are sin. The only thing I can tell you to do is go forward. Trust that God is going to be there. He's going to figure it out, whether before you do it or on the other side. I can't guarantee anything except that God is going to be there. And God will hold you fast. And God will be, and there will be a time on the other side that you feel His presence again. There will be a time. It might be a long time, but there will be a time when you feel His presence again. And He will be there. He's never left you, no matter what. Have the band come up, please.